Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning, this afternoon, this evening, wherever you're joining us from. We're so excited for today. We have an amazing event on digital engineering and construction, and we're so lucky to be having an incredible panel. And this panel is joining us from around the world, and I know you guys are too. So I would love to hear where you're joining us from in the chat if you want to share that with us. Also, we would love for you guys to ask questions. So to ask a question to our speakers today, please go ahead and use the Q&A button. You're going to see that located at the bottom of the screen. And I do want to remind you guys that for all Hive Think Tank sessions, we do record it and send it out automatically to you guys the next day. So there's a lot of you guys that have been here before. Welcome back. And for those of you who are new, welcome to the Hive Think Tank series. We're going to just jump in real quick and explain what we do and what the Hive does before we delve into our incredible content tonight. So if you are new here and you haven't heard of us before, where have you been? And so glad you're here now. So what is the Hive Think Tank? The Hive Think Tank is an ecosystem of entrepreneurs, corporations, and thought leaders. And we are trying to hold conversations and events and meaningful experiences around data, AI, health tech, fintech, insurtech, and anywhere where digitization and this whole movement towards heavy analytical and data-based elements are being used. So we're so excited to be seeing how the construction industry is being changed by this, and all our speakers are going to give us a big round of debate and hopefully a little bit of argumentativeness. So we're going to see some fun sparring here from our gentlemen. And without further ado, I want to thank our sponsors. If I can have the next slide, Ravi, thank you. Our special sponsor today of all of our sponsors is Gamuda. We are so excited to be joined by a couple of Gamuda employees, our dear friends John and Tony, who are going to be speaking here tonight. And thank you to Avanta, SAP, and TIBCO as well. I will drop my information in the chat, and if you'd like to learn more about partnering with the Hive Think Tank, please email me. And without further ado, here's TM Ravi, the Hive's founding managing director and founder. Without further ado, here's Ravi.
Thank you, Maddie. First, it's exciting to have this event where we have participants from Malaysia, from Saudi Arabia, from those are just the panelists, and of course audience members from the US also. So thank you for joining us. So the Hive is a venture capital entity, early stage venture capital entity that funds companies that leverage data and AI to drive transformation. And here you see sort of some of our focus areas. So in addition to the general enterprise, the industrial space, fintech, insurtech, health tech are some of the key focus areas. In addition to the Hive that we have in Palo Alto, we have separate Hives in KL in Malaysia to cover the Southeast Asian region, Brazil, India, and in September of this year, we are launching the Hive in Europe. So if you're an entrepreneur and are early stage company and looking for funding, please reach out to myself or Matty, and we'd love to connect with you. Today, it's a great pleasure for me to introduce John from Gamuda. John is the head of Gamuda Excellence Transformation, and who will also moderate the conversation. And I have some slides, John, so just let me know and I can go to the next slide.
Sure, perfect. Thank you so much, Ravi, for the introduction. What we're going to do today, we're talking about digital engineering in construction. But maybe before we start, let me introduce myself. I am the moderator for today's session. My name is John, and I represent a multinational construction company here in Malaysia called Gamuda Berhad. My background is mostly in the tunneling sector. So I've been working on some of the tunneling projects here in KL, and specifically in the innovation side, looking at how can we develop tools to help our tunneling processes digitally. Currently, I'm leading a team at Gamuda Group level, focusing on innovation and elevating digital excellence in Gamuda Group. So it's really good to be here today with all of you guys. Thank you so much for joining in. With me, I have a very distinguished panel of digital engineering experts across the world, very literally. So I'd like them to also introduce themselves before we start the session for today. So I'll pass the time to Ronan to introduce himself.
Hey, good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, depending on where you are. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Perfect. So yeah, so I'm actually in Saudi Arabia. I've been here about a year, and I'm working on the Red Sea project. And you'll see here on this slide that we're sorry, jumping around a bit. So the Red Sea project is one of the Vision 2030 projects for the Saudi Arabia government. And what we're doing is we're developing a new tourism economy in Saudi Arabia, with the intention of generating 70,000 jobs over the coming years and contributing 22 billion riyals, which is equivalent to Malaysian ringgit, to the national GDP. Next slide there, Ravi, please. So this is a massive undertaking. So we're transforming a absolutely pristine area of the Red Sea coast, which is on the western shoreline of Saudi Arabia. We're building the infrastructure to support that, which includes the highways and airports and all of the utilities. It's a fully energy independent environment. So we're building our own solar power, our own wind generating system, and our own energy storage system. And then we're building all the assets, hotels, villas, golf courses, and other assets. And the last slide there, please, Ravi. And as part of that process, to develop these hotels, we've got 16 hotels, over 3,000 rooms, and we expect about 300,000 visitors per year. These hotels are in island locations, shoreline locations, and inland locations. They're in some of the most stunning arena in Saudi Arabia. And it's all been designed using digital processes and also being constructed using a lot of digital technology. So very, very exciting project, and lots of lessons learned that we hope to share today and in the future. So thank you all very much for inviting me, and I'll pass on to the next speaker.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Ronan. Next person will be Mr. Yip from AECOM.
Hi, thank you, John, and good day, everyone. So I'm Yap here. I'm representing AECOM attending these discussions that's organized by Hive, and I would like to appreciate the host in having us here, all right, to share our thoughts in terms of digitizations in this industry, right? So on my background, just to share with everyone, I involved mainly on the design management as well as the interface management as a background, as engineering backgrounds, right? But I've been practicing BIM or digital implementations for various projects here in Southeast Asia. My current role is the BIM lead for Southeast Asia AECOM, where I am responsible to oversee most of all our projects, particularly on the major infrastructure projects, which I share in these decks just to illustrate on the scale as well as the role and responsibilities that I'm performing, right? So the first projects that I have shared on the top left corners, that is the LRT Phase 2A projects, which is fall under the developments of JetPro. So AECOM has been appointed as the client's BIM consultants, where AECOM is responsible to help the clients to establish EIR as well as AIR to leverage the digital twins for the entire LRT Phase 2A extensions, right? As for the next, the other job that I have involved heavily on will be on the KV MRT, right? So this is the same job that we have met with the rest of the panelists like Roland and Tony, and we have a very good synergies in terms of this KV MRT SSP projects, which is the first infrastructure projects that is compliant with BIM Level 2 requirements here in these Asian regions, right? Currently, I'm also overseeing in terms of the Subic Club Railway projects in Philippines, having the same role as the client's BIM managers. So currently, I think I am focusing on that in terms of developing the requirements, all right? And the last job I'm sharing will be on the TWRP projects in Singapore, which is the Tuas Wastewater Plants Contract C4A. All right, so this job, AECOM has been supporting our contractors, CES, as a BIM consultants to deliver in terms of all the BIM modelings as well as the data asset management systems for the clients for the projects, right? So I think that's it. That is all about myself. I will hand over back to John. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Mr. Yap. Over to you, Tony.
Hi, everyone. So I'm the head of digital engineering in Gamuda, and I lead the digital engineering initiatives in MRT2 and also for the Penang Transport Master Plan in Penang. So MRT2 is railway infrastructure with tunneling involved. And for the Penang Transport Master Plan, it covers the 3 islands in the south for smart city, as well as the LRT from Georgetown. Like the slide says, I have experience in various industries over the last 25 years. I've worked in various parts of the region and involved in many leading edge technology as well as implementation. So I've worked with Ronan and Yip previously in the Line 2 project, and now working very closely with John in implementing a lot of the digital engineering initiatives as well as the GATE initiatives in Gamuda. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Tony. So as you guys can see, we have a very distinguished panel coming from various parts of the construction process, from design to the construction, project management. I think we're going to have a really good time here today, picking our brains about digital engineering for construction. And maybe just to set a bit of context, because I'm sure many are watching from various parts of the world, people who might or might not be in construction, or at least maybe have an understanding of what construction is. And usually it's the guy in the hard hat or the guy who has a shovel or a hammer in his hand. But today, I just want to paint a bit of context because we're talking about digital engineering for construction. There are some reports out there that say that, construction is one of the least digitalized industries in the world. It is one where, a lot of work is still considered manual labor, and a lot of processes are still very mundane and rudimentary. Now that's perception about the construction industry, but I think today with our discussion panel, we want to unwrap a little bit about how digital has really helped the construction industry move from brick and mortar or from shovel and hammer to something that's a lot more collaborative, something that's a lot more future ready. In the world that we live in today, we talk a lot about disruption. And I'm sure the construction industry is ripe. The construction industry is ripe for disruption. So with that, I would like to open up with a first question to the panelists here today. Maybe a simple one. In layman terms, what is digital engineering in construction? Maybe I'll pose a question to Ronan, perhaps.
Okay, thanks, John. So I think it's a broad term that covers quite a lot of things. So for some people, it's BIM when it comes to design, using things like Revit or Tekla or Navisworks to do design coordination. For guys on the sites, it might be the use of systems like Field View, where they've got iPads and they're collecting information and they're using that to do some forms, which was a hugely successful implementation during COVID on the Gamuda sites. To other people, it could be drones, laser scanning, and other kinds of technology where it's new and it's great and it's exciting and everything else. And then for other people like Tony, who's into GIS and all that kind of data and systems, or myself and Yap, who are involved in document management systems, it could be all of that. So digital engineering covers all of the different uses of technology across the construction. But I think you tapped on one thing that's hugely important, is the collaboration. And for me, it's how you use all those different systems, share information, exchange information to get to the end result, which is getting the building built and handed over to the owner for their use. So for me, digital engineering is essentially a collaboration and way of thinking, and collaboration way of working, but it all comes back to how we share and exchange information.
Thank you so much, Ronan. So what I gather from that is really the key word being information and perhaps sharing as well. I suppose for the benefit of our audience, in large multinational construction projects, in huge mega infrastructure projects, to provide some context, how much information are we talking about, and what kind of information is at play here? Maybe I'll pose this question to Tony.
Yeah, I think if you look at, based on my experience, right? Because I started off when I was in university, I was doing architecture, and I was a CAD draftsman at that time. And if you look at the drawings, they were all graphical or geometry based, right? So if you look at it, there wasn't a database behind it. The power of what we are seeing in terms of digital engineering is not just the graphic representation, I feel, but also comes with a database. Now, over time, as technology moves, computing power and server speed has improved, we notice that the transition from just basic drawings or graphics into more database-centric applications has changed the industry. I mean, even if you look at oil and gas, right, they've been, they are much more advanced in terms of adopting all of this technology, but it all comes with a database and standards that define it. So I think digital engineering, to me, looking at the evolution of it follows the evolution of computing power, and together with web application and mobile application. So we just need to ride that wave.
All right. Thank you so much, Tony. And maybe I'll extend this question also to Mr. Yip, just to maybe ask the question, to what extent is digital engineering adopted throughout the world? Probably from AECOM's perspective, you would have quite a good view of digital engineering in a global perspective.
Yeah, indeed, that's a very interesting questions, and I would say it's $1 million questions, all right, that's been posed, right? As you have rightly mentioned at the start of this opening, right? Construction industry has been labeled as the least digitized industries. And I remember I come across this when I was participating the survey with McKinsey back in 2016, when they have this lighthouse projects with good digital implementations. So they did share their findings with me back then, all right? I think it's a report published in 2015, where construction's industry digitizations is only ranked, I think it's it's only one rank higher compared with hunting as well as agriculture industry, right? Whereas the rest of oil and gas, ICTs, and hospitals is all far ahead in terms of adopting digitizations in their own respective industry, right? So when we come to that, I think it really gives us a very good reflections why we are only better than the hunting industry, all right? And that's typically not acceptable, right? So with that, I think the rest is history. I think that's happened back in 2016, all right? So when we see major projects such as Crossrails, that has been launched back in 2013 to 2014, all right? There is a push from Crossrail driving the BIM adoptions globally, all right? And that indeed, you can see that the impact slowly, that project become a catalyst and slowly impact many of the other nations in terms of BIM adoptions in these regions, right? So the clear, I think the direct catalyst that affecting, let's give Malaysia as an example, right? KVMRT has become one of the projects that we leverage and we reference heavily back to Crossrails, right? And with that, we have mandated, I remember MRTCs have mandated BIM adoption based on BIM level 2, that is past 192 standards. And that indeed become one of the first project in these regions that's driving these requirements in this region. And I still remember back then that many of my peers back in Singapore is actually very surprised why Malaysia's developers, MRTCs, has been so aggressively pushing on this BIM adoption at the start, right? But subsequently over the years from 2016 to 2022 as of now, right, you can see a lot of regions adoption has already started changing. Hong Kong, for example, the government agency has been pushing on digitizing all their current assets very heavily, all right, for all their major infra. And key developers like the MTR, all right, in all their new projects, they are already pushing as a BIM mandate, complying with BIM level 2 requirements, all right, so that is heading on the right track. And countries like countries like Indonesia, all right, key infrastructure developers like MRTJ as well as JetPro, they are referencing their BIM adoptions based on Malaysia KVMRT approach, and everything is referenced back to ISO 19650 standard as for now. All right, so you can see that even Indonesia is heading towards a digitization for the industry, right? Whereas Philippines, similarly, most of the projects has been also adopting BIM requirements, right? So you can see the industry in this Asia region has already start shifting, all right, towards compliance to certain BIM requirement standard when there is for them, there is a standard for them to reference, right? The only country currently, I believe, where BIM is still heavily driven by private industry, all right, that will be Thailand as well as Vietnam, right? But I can see that some of the private developments, such as all the smart city developments, are start influencing how their state governments in pushing and mandating digitizations to their nations, all right? Slowly, but I believe definitely that they are able to actually progress in terms of that adoption in these regions. Right? So
Awesome.
that's my perspective in terms of that adoptions.
So
Awesome.
can I make a comment on that as well, just to be really clear? So
Go for it,
so
Ronan.
all those cases that you're citing, Yap, are absolutely relevant and very, very important. But they're the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the industry. So when you move away from a large project that typically Gamuda get involved with, or a tunneling project or a wayware project or these major infrastructure projects, and you get back to the bread and butter construction industry, like apartment buildings, commercial buildings, housing projects, they're still very much paper-based driven projects. Some of them are using AutoCAD, most of them are not. So I think we have to be very clear when we talk about things like McKinsey and they talk about the state of our industry. There are absolutely lighthouse club or lighthouse projects out there showing the way and demonstrating how it can be done. But unfortunately, they're not big enough and there's not enough of them to sway the whole industry. So I think the challenge is getting the middle of the industry to adopt these technologies and these processes in a collaborative environment. So we will always find showcase projects, whether it's the Red Sea project, whether it's KVMRT projects, as to how to do it, but it's getting the rest of the industry to actually come along on the journey and understand the value. And I think the biggest challenge we have is the way that we run our industry commercially. It's a competitive industry. There's very, very tight margins. It's very difficult to invest in these processes, very difficult to invest in training people. And I think that's the real crux of the problem, is that we can sit here all morning and talk about what we did and showcase what we did on the projects on KVMRT and other projects. But we've got to be cognizant of the fact that most of the people that are going to listen to this call or eventually watch the recording may not have the pleasure or the opportunity to work on these mega projects, and they're looking at day-to-day commercial residential projects where BIM, drones, GIS, cloud sharing platforms are just not the norm.
Thank you so much, Ronan. I think that's a very relevant point. So we see that going back to the original question about how digitized is the industry, we see mega lighthouse projects that show the way as to what's possible. But we also see a smaller part, like the lower part of the industry with the smaller projects struggling to find footing in digital because of either the costs and things like that. Maybe it's a question to explore about, in your past projects, what has been the value that that the project gets from actually managing data well and adopting more digital processes? Perhaps I'll pose that to I'll pose that to you, Ronan.
Oh, thanks very much. So this is the classic return on investment question. And I've been quite honest over the years and said that BIM has failed to live up to its expectations. There's a lot of talk, a lot of hype, a lot of vendors get on podiums and applaud what these technologies can do. And even I've done it. I'm guilty of standing up and shouting from rooftops how great it is that we delivered this or delivered that. And we have had some huge successes, but measuring the ROI is actually quite difficult. I remember a project back in Hong Kong where I got a phone call from the project director one morning of a Saturday, and he was hopping mad because he couldn't understand why so many coring companies were on his site, drilling holes through his concrete and knocking out block work. And we'd done all this BIM and all this coordination. So I went out to meet him and we went around the site and looked at a few things. And it was immediately obvious that we had done the coordination, but we hadn't done the right coordination. And when the mechanical contractors started installing pipework and ductwork, they were installing them in slightly different locations to suit buildability, or that one system had been installed before another system. And it was then we started to realize that we need to be much more closely monitoring what was happening on site against what was happening in the models and design. So a lot of the processes and the technologies have a huge promise, but it's very hard to measure the return on investment. And what you find is that it does solve problems, and we do mitigate a lot of risks and we do mitigate a lot of issues. but it's very hard to put a number on it. And people always ask me, is it a percentage? Is it how many million ringgit did you save? And I said, we don't actually know. And one of the reasons we don't know, ironically, is our industry is really bad at measuring and recording data and recording metrics and doing analytics. We just move from one job to the next job to the next job. We don't know how many hours we spent on something. We don't know how many machines we used. We don't know how much material we've used. We don't know how much material we've wasted. As an industry, we're actually really bad at our metrics and our measuring. So it's actually ironic. We're trying to use these digital engineering solutions to improve our productivity, but yet we don't even know what our baseline is. So there are successes and there are benefits, and they far outweigh the old way of doing things, but I don't know how you measure it. And maybe Yap and ACOM has come up with some really clever ways of measuring it that we can start using. I know Arab tried that in the past, and they've tried to do BIM assessments and BIM scoring, but again, there's flaws in those. And maybe Tony's come up with some really clever ways of doing it for Penang. I'm not sure, but measuring productivity and measuring the impact of these solutions is actually really difficult.
Maybe Yip or Tony, any of you guys want to weigh in?
Yeah, if I just share my thoughts in terms of measurements on these ROI stuff, because back then when we start leveraging on BIM adoptions for certain mega infra projects, we do want to actually measure out the ROI, right? But technically, like what Roland has mentioned correctly, it's very difficult in terms of tracing back on all these, to quantify those items, all right? And to come up with realistic measurements that we can quantify in terms of the investments of humans as resources, as well as the software and hardware aspect. Right. So one way that I find that probably will be relevant will be on project of similar scale and complexities. All right. Normally what we will measure will be against on the number of the RFI as well as TQ raised. All right. With job that is adopting on digital implementation and job without. Right, but that's technically also doesn't exist now because most of our projects is all on BIM, right?
Yeah,
yeah.
And I would imagine that in the construction industry, it's quite different from other industries in the sense that we're not like a factory churning out the same project everywhere. Every project is different, right? Maybe I'll let Tony weigh in a little bit on that in terms of projects.
I don't know. I think I'm a bit more optimistic than these two guys. I feel that, I mean, like I said, in my career, I've always ridden the wave of technology. And one of the most important changes I've seen in the last few years is the communication and collaboration tools, right? So you can just start off with just WhatsApp. I mean, you don't have to have a mega project to have a good communication tool, right? And you have a lot of free cloud solutions out there to manage your documents. So open source, work with open source document management systems, work with cloud servers. So very easy to set up. So traditionally you needed a huge IT team to manage your infrastructure, but now you let Microsoft Azure or AWS or even Google manage your infra. And then you use open source software to manage all of your documents as well. I mean, you don't have to talk about CDEs yet, but just to, simple communication. We've got contractors who didn't even have email when they joined the project. And because we implemented a mobile app called FieldView, they started using it as means of communication, to replace email. So I think first communication, find the right tool for you to communicate, whether it's a mobile app, an online storage system for your documents, then work with collaborations. So the last 2 years with this pandemic, we see a lot of people starting to, even here now, right? We're using Zoom and we started using video conference. Can you imagine this about 5 years ago? So the second aspect of what I see technology is helping a lot is communicating between consultants, contractors, and also staff using all these collaboration tools. So 1, communication, 2, collaboration, right? And I think I want to add a little bit about the continuity of knowledge transfer. One of the biggest problems that I think we have in the industry is the turnover rate among our staff, especially young engineers who are maybe disgruntled with not enough incentives or salary. So where is that knowledge kept? How do we transfer this knowledge into other projects. For example, if we are lucky enough to win the next line for MRT, how do we transfer the knowledge we have right now in line 2 into future project? Because we've got such a huge skill set, and if we lose them, how are we going to manage future projects? Because again, this is where I see digital engineering. One is, like I mentioned, communication, collaboration, and the other one is continuity of knowledge transfer. So I'm a bit more optimistic in terms of technology.
Thank you so much, Tony. I think that's really interesting viewpoint. So we have thought about, ROI. Can you really measure it? We see some qualitative things about, the benefits of digital engineering. Maybe perhaps a question should also be posed about the future, right? So we understand that AI, blockchain, big data, these are words that, a lot of people talk about, right? Now, we've also
You forgot one.
Oh, yes, one more.
Don't forget the metaverse. That's the newest BS that's going on. Don't forget about metaverse. That's the new BS.
I will ask a question towards the end about the metaverse. So hold your horses.
I won't answer that one. I'll pass on that one.
So yeah, even as we talk about AI, blockchain, and big data, and we also say that projects are ephemeral, right? Contractors do one project, they move on to the next and the next and the next. How would these new technologies factor into construction? Maybe I'll pose that question.
Let me dive straight in there. At the moment, they don't. So again, there's too much hype. So what are you talking about AI? Like, there's a lot of people now talking about AI, and I find it fascinating. It goes back to my previous point. If we don't measure data in our industry and we don't have all the data points, then AI doesn't work. And so unless you've got millions and millions of data points, your AI is not going to factor in. But more interestingly and more importantly, touching on Tony's point about how much we're paying engineers and how much we're paying our people, if you know how to write algorithms that can use AI, you're not going to be working in the construction industry. You're going to be working in fintech. You're going to be working in banking. You're going to get a job working for the Meta, whatever the hell company is behind Facebook these days. You're not going to be working for construction. And that's one of the biggest challenges, is that even if we wanted to use these solutions and we wanted to use them correctly, we don't have the draw power to get the resources. And there's just not enough people. There's not enough people around that know blockchain, that know AI, to put it into the lucrative industries. Like, if you talk to people in fintech, if you talk to people in Google or Facebook, they cannot find these guys. And if they can't find them and they can't track them with massive paycheck offers, forget about getting them in the construction industry. So I think we have to kind of be realistic, and don't get me wrong, I very often sound like the pessimist as I get older, and I've done 25 years of digital transformation. I start to wear a bit thin. I still believe in technology. I still believe it's going to work, but I think we have to focus on the brute fundamentals. If we can get people to use a common data environment correctly, if we can get people to put the data into their information deliverables correctly, if they can actually label the data in the right way, so we can actually find it, so we can actually use machines to audit it, so we can actually use computers to check it, we will make huge leaps and bounds forward. But all of the guys on this call know full well that we can write standards, we can write requirements, we can write, oh, you must comply with ISO 19650, and all the consultants and all the contractors that were bidding for work will say, yes sir, I can do that, no problem. And they blag their way to the seat at the table and they start their work, and next thing you know, you're getting PDFs with Ronan's favorite drawing .01 with a date at the end of it, when it should be complying with a naming convention. Or you're getting Tony's model from 22nd of February 2022 with changes instructed by YAP in meeting on such and such a date .pdf. And you're going, how on earth am I supposed to use this information? So I think we need to be realistic. People need to do the basics right, and people need to do the basics consistently. And I think that goes back to Tony's point around training and skills retention. If we don't train people, if we don't provide the training, if we don't provide the skills, if we don't get them to understand the importance of it, forget about AI, forget about all these other fancy things. They have huge potential. Don't get me wrong, they have massive potential for our industry, but we can't do the basics. And in the absence of the basics, they're all going to fall flat on their face.
That's interesting, Ronan. So what I'm hearing is that it's actually not a digitalization problem, it's more of a digitization problem. it's like the start of the process of even getting data to become digital is really the bottleneck for most projects across the world, right? Because how do you get construction people to adopt digital tools, right? Even if it's not AI, even if it's just a simple form, a mobile app that allows you to track information on site. How do you get that done to a good enough degree, right? Even before the project ends, right? Because a project just comes and goes in a span of 5 years or a certain amount, and then it just goes. Maybe Yip, would you like to weigh in on this as well?
Yeah, if I can just chip in terms of this AI and machine learning stuff, just to quote one example, when I was involved in one test case, I was called a proof of concept assessment with some of the vendors, right? When we look into the possibilities in adopting like laser scanners, in measuring and scanning the entire underground tunnel structures to define in terms of all the cracks as well as settlements, all right, throughout the tunnels, right? So when you look into the number of data points, I can tell you once you adopting this type of AI as well as scanning, all right, what you are not lagging will be on the data. You are getting millions and millions of data points, all right? And the biggest challenge, like what Roland has mentioned earlier on, all right, is in terms of the workflow, all right, the historical informations, as well as the parameters and the threshold that is required to set up as an alert point to the operators, right? Because ultimately, after we carry out that, I wouldn't say we carry out, but after we see the demos that we carry out, it simply there will be too much trigger and too much information coming in to the operators. And the information will be so overwhelmed that everyone will just simply ignore in terms of all those red alerts that's going to be triggers, all right? Because there is no historical measurements or data that you can benchmark with, whether this is genuine or this is something preventive that require actions from the operators, right? So I believe in terms of strengthenings on this, before we start to think about leveraging on AI and machine learning, right? I think in terms of the workflow as well as the expectation on these algorithms to triggers on the attentions for all these preventive as well as asset performance requirements, that will probably need to take a step back by the operators or the owners, all right, to think it through before they can roll out a successful solution plan. Right.
Right. So I think this touches on Ronan's earlier point also about training. And I know training is something that Ronan is currently doing here in the Red Sea, Gamuda as well, and I'm sure for AECOM too. Maybe perhaps we can think about that direction a little bit more. What does the industry need to do in order to push this forward? Let me pose that to Ronan.
Thanks, Sean. I think the industry has to recognize that unless we train up people and give them opportunity to learn new skills and take these technologies forwards, that they're going to be relying on the innovators in the industry. So they're going to be relying on guys who are either on this panel or who are probably the guys who are listening in on this call who want to learn these things, who want to be forward thinking. But those innovators are a small number of people inside of our businesses. So if the owners, if the contractors, if the consultants want to actually make meaningful change, they have to train the middle of the business. They have to train the middle management, the project managers, the site engineers, and they have to give them the tools and the skills to adopt these technologies. It's not a simple. We all live in this microwave culture where everything happens in 3 minutes, and it doesn't. People need to be skilled up. They need to be given the experience. Need to give them the learning, and it needs to be a long-term strategy, a long-term approach. And I know, having spent years working with Gamuda in Malaysia, that there is an absolute, to the core, inherent belief that people have to get trained. And Gamuda are really good at that training and bringing people up and skills. And now we're building the same capacity at the Red Sea, where we've got learning people, we've got learning management systems, we've got courses we're giving people. We're about to set up an academy, hopefully at the Red Sea site, where we can train people around digital tools, digital processes. And it's part of our project mandate is to upskill the local industry and transfer knowledge to the local industry. But again, these are lighthouse projects, these are lighthouse organizations. The rest of the industry has to realize that unless we invest in research, in training, in skills development, we're going to be having this conversation for the next 10, 15, 20 years as to why is the construction industry the second to last industry in the world to be digitized? What are we not doing? And I don't think it's about technology. I think it's about the people. I think it's about our approach to training. I think it's about our approach to retention. And I think it's fundamental. We have to start thinking 5 years, 10 years out. How do we get there? And what skills are people going to need to be useful in that environment 5, 10 years from now?
It's interesting. And I think maybe from the perspective of government as well, what role does the government play in all of this? Maybe I'll ask the question to Tony.
Oh, how I feel, I mean, we've got the consultants, right? And then you've got the contractors, and then you've got the client. So contractors generally low cost, high profit, right? And consultants, of course, again, trying to charge the longest man hours. The client somehow is getting more and more, client somehow is getting more and more intelligent now. And they want to monitor the project better, right? And they want to manage this project better. So in that sense, a lot of the tenders that we are seeing now, you know, John, the tenders that we've worked in Australia, Singapore, and many of the tenders even in Penang, the client is putting these requirements in because it's come to a point where they probably, you know, attending many conferences or, you know, looking at other international projects, look at the benefit from a client perspective. Now, we as contractors, I mean, sad to say this, we will try as much as possible to make our, you know, I mean, to get the highest profit in any project. But at the same time, because the client is mandating a lot of these requirements, we are forced to follow. Now, having said that, I believe, again, coming back to the young talent that we have, it's very frustrating to see a lot of the young talent, you know, when they try to innovate, because they're trying to solve small problems daily in their work, right? And that's where I see the most innovation. I don't look at innovation from, you know, at the huge implementations in a lot of these cloud systems, but the daily innovation that maybe an engineer needs to write a script to help him with his spreadsheet. Maybe an engineer needs to do a little bit more analysis on his data. He needs to learn Python code. Maybe he needs to pick up some new way to, you know, model his, you know, 3D model better. So all of this is ways for him to improve his daily life. Now, if we encourage this, and this is where I think what you have initiated, the Data Heroes plan in Gamuda, where we empower young engineers, but we have to incentivize them, right? No point coming up with innovation if you don't incentivize them. So daily innovation in your work, in helping, you know, with your daily tasks, and also with, you know, improving your own KPIs. So start with that. So we need to empower them with that. Now, the second thing, since Ronan mentioned about AI, yes, I totally agree with Ronan and Yip. AI has been misused and probably misrepresented in a lot of projects, right? So there's this thing called the pyramid of AI and machine learning. It always starts out with digital data, then you aggregate the data, then you analyze the data, then you put it into machine learning, and finally AI. So I think a lot of us are still at the stage of analytics and machine learning. We've not reached the point of using AI yet in construction. And I think you know, of most people will know with your automated TBM that you really need a lot of this digital data aggregated, like what Yip said, right? You can get a lot of, you know, junk data coming in from your IoT devices, from your switches, from, you know, from your laser scans, but how do you aggregate this data, analyze the data, and then use machine learning to identify this data? So I think there's two things here we need to look at.
I think those are very, very good points. Right now, we're about to move towards the Q&A session. But before I do, since we brought up the topic about the metaverse, I would love to pose this question.
You brought it up. You brought it up, not me. You brought it up.
I would like to pose this question to Ronan. How will the metaverse affect the construction industry?
It'll be a distraction. So I think, to be honest, I've tried to stay away from it, and I've been listening to podcasts and stuff over the last couple of months, and people have got, it's very polarizing. So some people are all for it and think it's going to change the world, and people like me are going, here comes the next round of BS. So I don't know the answer to your question. I don't know what its impact's going to be. It's not going to go away. My son is 7. He's currently wandering around here looking at rocks and climbing up and down hills with his mum, and he will end up in the metaverse at some point, probably in the gaming environment, possibly in an educational environment. But I don't know how it's going to get into our industry anytime soon. And one of the examples you can look to is virtual reality and augmented reality. So when you look at virtual reality, it's got a niche, and we've used VR very successfully for doing design reviews, for looking at models in a kind of a laboratory environment. And we've used augmented reality far more effectively on construction sites, where we're actually able to overlay the models and solve the problems that I talked about earlier that we saw in Hong Kong. But I think metaverse has got a long way to go. Again, its use cases and its profits are not going to come from the construction industry. They're going to come from high turnover, high population environments like gaming, like education. It is going to have a role. So somebody's going to sell it to somebody, and it's going to end up on some project, and some owner's going to think it's the best thing to slice bread. But for the majority of the industry, I don't see it happening anytime soon, and it's certainly not going to affect my career in the next 15 years. But and I've said this before, and it's come back to bite me. So as far as I'm aware, I don't see it as a future yet.
Okay, all right. Thanks, Ronan. What about the rest? Do you guys have an opinion on the metaverse?
Well, I mean, from my own understanding and perspective, all right, I think everything's out. I mean, eventually in the future, you will need a digital representations, probably in the metaverse, right? So you probably will have a mini duplication of Roland's, right, sitting somewhere, strolling in metaverse, attending concerts, or even attending VDR, all right, virtual design review, rather than attending a physical meetings. But I think there's no limitations, and the technology has not really, all right, there's already a concept, and there's a sales case and a business case, I believe, all right? There's already a business case, people driving for it. But the actual success stories, I think, is still something still unknown, because a lot of applications that we use for construction is currently already been practiced as part of the AR and VR process, right? You are just moving that process and integrate to another environment set, metaverse, right? And at these junctures, I don't think we are able to foresee whether that's going to be a positive or that is going to be a negative impact to the industry, right? That will be from my own perspective, right?
Yeah, so it's still early days for the metaverse. Yeah. Perfect. Let's get into the Q&A session. I see that there's quite a lot of open questions, and thank you so much everyone for contributing questions to the discussion. Maybe I'll pick some from the list, and we'll see how we go with time. All right, so first question from Ben Smith. How important is it that the industry separates the data, the standards, and the schema from software companies producing BIM related programs?
100% necessary. So the industry has gotten very clever and very aware of the behemoths of the software companies. So you've really got 3 massive software vendors in Autodesk, in Bentley, and in Trimble, and there's other ones coming along, like companies like Procore who are making inroads into the industry. But you've got massive giants in the industry, and it's absolutely essential that the standards and the data structures are actually kept independent of those systems. And the companies will tell you, and I've been on calls recently with people in Autodesk, they'll say, oh yeah, we're following IFC4 and all of our software produces these independent formats. The reality is that it's not entirely compliant, and there's always going to be gaps and everything else. So I think what we have to be careful is that the industry should be made, again, it goes back to training and understanding, right? So people like Tony have a very, very deep understanding of this issue. But the software companies need to be held to account to deliver agnostic data deliverables that can be used in other applications. And it's this interoperability challenge. In 25 years of my experience in digital tools and construction, it's always been an issue, and it will continue to be an issue. But it is an important topic for conversation that we separate the data from the software tools. It's not easy. It's a very complicated problem. It comes with a lot of software licensing issues. But fundamentally, the owner should be asking for data that can be used in other applications that is not tied to a particular organization or a particular product or a particular IP. But it's an aspiration, and it's a very difficult aspiration to meet. Perfect.
Thank you so much, Ronan. I totally agree. I think with software in the world today, we've got so many choices, and the question is whether they can actually talk to each other and whether they can actually extract meaningful insight. So that's a good point. I think Joyce is asking a question on similar lines as well. So we'll move on from there. Let's move to another question about are there union-like associations that DE talents can leverage from for their career paths, especially those who are maybe project-based? Are there digital engineering associations that they can get connected to?
Interesting.
Does anybody know?
There's not a union, if you like. I know in Hong Kong that I was involved in, and it's still going strong, is there's a Hong Kong Institute for Building Information Modeling, which was modeled on the Engineering Institute membership. So you have the situation where a group of people who are in the space and are learning and sharing ideas have formed an institution or an association. That's the only example that I'm familiar with. Most of the groups are informal groups on things like LinkedIn. There's a lot of people who have got LinkedIn channels for BIM or LinkedIn groups for digital engineering or those kind of things. But if you mention the word union and you're sitting in a contractor's office, you're going to find yourself sitting at their front porch very, very quickly. So union is probably not the right term to use, but that alludes to people looking for more money and turning off computers so they don't get their pay and all that kind of stuff. So I think in terms of associations, I think there's not that many out there. Things like Building Smart is probably the biggest international group that share a lot of knowledge and a lot of information, but it's not necessarily a membership organization. So if someone wants to set up a digital engineering membership group, there's probably an opportunity, there's probably a gap in the market, but I think most people will rely on things like LinkedIn networking or these kind of webinars to get information.
Yeah. All right, perfect. Let's try another question. Digitization growth is extremely slow in specific countries and among small-scale construction companies. What should be implemented to make sure the same or even close amount of growth of digitization is experienced overall? Which I think he means from the big projects to the small projects. How do we get this flow of good technologies even into the small? Maybe I'll pose this to Yip or Tony if you guys want to have it.
Yeah, maybe if I can just chip in just to how we can improve in terms of these digitizations for organizations, regardless big and small, right? If we just look into the client perspective, I mean, as a AE consultant, I mean, we do help out the clients in preparing all the tender documentations, right? So I think one of the key questions always we ask the client is probably sometimes it's worth for them to rethink in terms of the procurement strategies, how we can actually foster on the innovations, right, at the start of the planning stage with the contractors or with the detailed engineering consultants, all right, in terms of encouraging digitizations as well as innovations in adopting, imposing all those requirements into the works, right? So value engineering is always one of the best mechanisms that we can use and encourage, right? And if it can be supported by good business case and profit sharings between the clients and the contractors, I think that can actually encourage, all right, the industry in leveraging the projects with more digital tools, right? And another option is always, we will always take innovations on digitization as part of the key technical evaluations when we start evaluating the tender returns from either from the consultants or from the contractors, all right? So if most of the developers or the clients is adopting similar approach, then we are actually sending quite a strong signals down to the industries, right? That they have to actually embrace in terms of these digitalizations, all right, to improve how the projects could be delivered, right?
Yeah. So incentivization for companies to innovate, incentivization through the tenders, to procurement, those are really good points.
Let me just be a bit more argumentative on this issue, right? I understand the benefit of government mandates, and I understand the benefit of large organizations taking a lead. But let's call a spade a spade. If you're running a business and you're not going to invest in transforming your business into something that can be useful in 2 or 3 years' time, you're not going to be in business. So I don't understand, if you look at the industry, we are slow to change. But if you don't understand what's coming and you don't understand that digitalization of the construction industry is not the future, it's now, and these tools are necessary, And if you're sitting there and you go, why am I not getting CVs? Why are people not applying to work in my company? Why are the young engineers going to work for Tony and Gamuda? Why aren't they come work for me? You have a serious problem. So I think smart business people will realize that they don't really have a choice. They have to figure this out. They have to figure out the most economical way of investing in it. And they need to then front up to their owners saying, we've invested in drones, we've invested in this, we've invested in that, and make their case for a positive approach to a client going, Mr. Client, you don't need to specify BIM. We do this as business as usual. And it's our business model. So I'm not a big believer in always relying on the hand of the client or the hand of the government to sway the industry. I think that's a little bit of BS. I think companies that are going to be successful are going to be the ones that invest in these processes and technologies, and the ones that don't are the ones that won't be here in 5 years' time, and the people will move on. Companies don't live forever, and the ones that reinvent themselves, the ones that invest in the future, are the ones that will be here in 5-10 years' time.
Yep. I think those are really good points. I think if we look at the S&P 500, many of the companies that existed 50 years ago, 60 years ago are not in business today. And a lot of the new companies that we see in the S&P 500 are companies birthed in the past decade or 2 decades. And that list is changing all the time, right? So companies come and go, and you're right, they need to invest in innovation and take it as business as usual, right? So that's a really good point. Moving on to a different question, because this is from the perspective of a young person who's asking, actually, what should I study? Like for a person who has done a civil engineering bachelor's, if he wanted to move on into a master's or a postgraduate, and should he go into areas such as BIM, artificial intelligence, digital built environment? What are the options out there for people in this space to learn?
YouTube. I think I come from the school of get your basics, get into the industry and learn within the industry. I think there's a lot of opportunity to learn within the industry. Yep. I think if you've got your bachelor's and you've got your initial qualification, that's a great way to get into the industry. But I think there's a lot of opportunity out there. But I think the best way to learn is actually get into the workplace and learn on the tools.
That's good. There's another question here about I guess the problem is too much focused on ROI and ROV. Tech does enhance tech does enhance the business, but the major challenges is adoption by the industry players. Is this a stakeholder mindset, or is it the amount, the cost involved in tech? Like, is software expensive?
Give that one to Acom.
Maybe I'll pass that to you. Yeah, is software expensive?
Yeah. All right. Maybe we just make it very clear in terms of the consultants' adoptions on digitization. All right, we will only adopt based on whatever clients has mandated. All right, for the projects. Right, as we need to be staying competitive in terms of our biddings in securing those projects. Right. So if we are looking into a full adoptions on digital scope projects, I think somehow the responsibilities always tie back to the client's requirements, all right? How they intend to leverage on the project information models or asset information models to carry, to leverage it from the designs, constructions to operation phase, right? If that has been mandated clearly by the clients, then in a way, it's not that difficult, or it already gives a very clear owner requirements passing down to the contractors for their full compliance to the deliverables. And the consultants or the contractors do have to invest in terms of all the skill sets as well as the software and hardware in complying to these requirements. The only question is when the client mandated that, all right, how specifically, all right, that the contractors is aware that the client really meant it. Because when I look into a lot of EIR and AIR requirement imposed by the client in this industry, right? So irregardless that the project is different, all right, you can see that most of the AIR and EIR that's issued is all typical and it's all duplicated, all right? So sometimes consultants of the contractors will just have a mindset that is just a standard documentation by the clients, and I can get away with that compliance requirements during the execution phase. And with that type of mindset, eventually, I think the risk is being exposed to both the clients and the contractors. So technically, the way I look at it is always that client has to be prescriptive. You need to be clear in your requirements as part of your PS as well as your TOR, right? So that both the supply chain as well as the clients, all right, is able to manage in terms of this risk to make sure that they get what they want, and the contractor is able to bid accordingly, all right, for that project.
Okay, thank you so much.
One last comment on software costs. I think it's a distraction. People see the ticket price of a software application and they conveniently ignore the salary that they have to pay the person to use the software, the desk and the office space that that person is occupying, and the business overhead to run that company that they're inside of, and they get distracted by an invoice for a piece of software. If you're not thinking about the cost of the salary, the cost of the business to run that software, and you're just worried about the cost of an individual license of an application, then you're not running your business in an appropriate manner. You're not thinking about it in broad terms. So anybody who asks me about the cost of software, they're asking the wrong question.
Thank you so much, Ronan. And thank you so much, everybody. I think we've run out of time. I just want to say a very big thank you to all our panelists here today. I think we've got some really good points, really good nuggets of information. And I'll pass the time back to Ravi and Matty.
Thank you, John, for moderating this conversation, and Mr. Yee, Tony, and Ronan for joining. And Matty, thanks for staying up late tonight and putting this whole thing together. Matty?
Likewise, Ravi. Likewise, Ravi, and thank you to our amazing panelists. I learned so much. I hope all of you guys did too. And thank you for joining us today. I will be sending out the recording tomorrow, and we hope to see you at future Think Tank events. Thank you so much, and have a great rest of your evening.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.